Hey,
Hey there.
welcome. My name's Taryn,
And I'm Tate,
and this is Plant That Sis podcast.
the podcast all about plants.
Hey, hey. Welcome back, friends.
Welcome.
Hope you are having a great time. I don't know what day it is for you. I guess it should come out on a Wednesday, technically, even though sometimes it comes out on a Thursday, sometimes it comes out on a Friday. But this week, I guess, how's it going? Hope you're having a great week. Hope you're staying warm. I don't know about y'all where you live, but here in Texas, once again, we're down to freezing weather, which is crazy again.
And people don't know how to act when it gets this cold.
Yeah, it's pretty wild over here.
People lose their brains, lose their minds.
I also must admit, aside from the icicles, which are pretty cute, this time around is not as fun as the white fluffy snow. It's really just ice.
Yeah, it's typical Texas snow right now.
When we get freezing weather, this is what it is. Yeah. It's also supposed to get down to the low that I have on my low weather app is 2 degrees
Shut up.
Fahrenheit. 2 degrees
2?
Fahrenheit. 2, not
Wow.
7. 2.
Wow.
So it's going to get wild to the point on my weather app, it had the warning of if you are exposed, any bearskin exposed for 15 minutes, you are at risk of frostbite.
Wow.
What is happening?
2 degrees? That's colder than when we were in Colorado in November.
Holy cow.
Like, it was already snowing and stuff there, but it wasn't 2 degrees.
Yeah, I was talking to Dad on the phone because I was like, what do I need to do for this house? Like, I don't know, steps for when it's that cold because it never gets that cold.
Oh, yeah. Our management property, they sent out all kinds of emails that were like, make sure the faucet's dripping and blah, 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 all this stuff. And for anyone listening that like lives where it gets cold all the time, they're probably laughing at us because
Yeah, they're
this
like,
is so
I cannot
normal for
believe
them.
y'all are tripping about it. Oh, you're that excited about frostbite? Come on.
It's hard for us, okay?
It's really crazy down here. Well, and it's going to happen for days. I don't know of a time where it's been icy. In my lifetime here in the Austin area of Texas, it's never been icy for more than 2 days, I don't think. So the fact that the next 5 days are going to be pretty much iced over is insane.
That is pretty crazy. Like, usually it goes away within a couple days, and it's back to being like 80 degrees
Yep.
Fahrenheit.
Anyway, enough about the weather. We are so excited about this episode. This is our first official Plant That Sis project episode.
Plant That Sis project.
Hey, hey. So I did this project at my house. So I'm going to be talking through all of the things that I did. Big fat disclaimer right up off the top. Do your own research. You guys know at this point, if you've been listening for the last 11 episodes, that we are not professionals. I do all my research online, and then I just wing it as best I can. So use your best judgment if you're planning on doing a project like this. Use your best judgment, do your own research. What works well for one does not always work for another. So remember that everything about plants, there's tons of variables. So just make sure you're accounting for that in your research. And yeah, but I do want you to follow along with. So of course, if you do end up following along, guess what we're going to tell you? Share it with us. But we'll tell you that again at the end.
Always.
The first project episode we're doing is Staghorn Fern Mounts. I know we kind of leaked that at some point a couple episodes ago, so we finally were able to do it, and we're so excited to share how we approached creating these super cool, edgy plant mounts.
Edgy?
They're kind of edgy.
I don't know if I'd say they're edgy. You think they're edgy?
Okay, this is why I say they're edgy. The only reason I say they're edgy is because I've seen people compare these to like having a deer head on the wall. Like this is the vegan version of having like antlers on your wall. You know what I'm saying?
I love that.
So that's why I'm saying edgy.
We stan.
I know, right? I think the look that I went for wasn't as edgy of a look. It's pretty natural looking, but I think you can go really edgy with it.
Yeah, it seems like a project that you could, I want to say it's like standard, but you could totally adapt it for whatever look you're going for. Seems adaptable.
Super adaptable. Tons of people out there have done it. You could go to any social media platform or whatever, YouTube, Google search, and you could find tons and tons of people who have done lots of variations of this same project. So again, by no means are we the professionals here, but I finally tried it and want to share because it was honestly so much fun and easier than I thought, and they turned out better than I thought they would. So
awesome.
Before we dive into how I did all of the steps, Tate is going to tell us a little bit about the actual plant. I obviously know a little bit about why they're mountable, but I didn't do all the research on that. So, Tate, tell us about what you know about why I can even hang this plant on some wood.
So the plant that we typically use, or that we typically talk about when we say Staghorn Fern, is the species Hold on. It's kind of a mouthful, so bear with me here. Platycerium superbum. Superbum, like you got a rockin' booty.
Boy, you got that boom, 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 babe.
Wow, Nikki, yes.
I had to put her in.
Okay,
I can't help myself. You can't say super bum and not expect me to reference super bass. Come on.
But yeah, so this fern is native to, Taryn, you're going to love this,
Ooh.
Australia. It's native to the tropical regions of Australia, and it is just one in the whole family of these kinds of ferns. So there's 17 other fern species within this genus.
Oh, shoot, 17?
Yeah, so there's all different kinds of ferns that are what we say epiphytic? Epiphytic, thank you. Obviously, pronouncing words is not my strong suit, but epiphytic. And so what that means is that this plant grows on other plants, and oftentimes that's trees, like the trunk of a tree. That doesn't mean that it's parasitic, it just means that it uses that plant for support. So it's not really sapping any of the nutrients or anything out of it, it's just sticking on there for some support. Who doesn't need a friend to lean on sometimes?
Right.
So
find you a friend you can lean on like a Platycerium super bum on a tree. Am I right?
Retweet.
T-shirt. Boom. Done.
Boom. So the Platycerium superbum, the name Platycerium, which is the genus, it derives from the Greek words platus, meaning flat, and ceres, meaning a horn. So like a flat horn, like the horn of a stag. And then superbum just is Latin for superb. The reason that Taryn and a lot of other people can mount these things onto some kind of wood or some other kind of surface to let them grow is because that's what they do naturally in the wild. They naturally mount onto trees or other hard surfaces. I would think mainly trees, honestly, and that's how they grow. And other plants like this that are epiphytic are, obviously we talked about them before, but air plants do this. You probably see moss growing on rocks or growing on other trees. And also some species of orchids do this as well.
I do think you can also hang Hoya.
Really?
Or mount some types of Hoya too.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but isn't that cool?
Next project.
Right? Writing it down. Well, before we move on, another thing that I want to say about just plant facts, and I'm only bringing this up because it is important. The staghorn fern has two different kinds of fronds. So you'll hear me say the word fronds instead of leaves, even though I'm sure I'll say leaves a bunch of times, but I mean fronds if I say leaves. Okay, so there's basically a shield frond and a not shield frond. So the shield frond is the sterile frond. This is the one that essentially we'll talk a little bit about why it's important, but there's only one or maybe two. I think as the plant grows, it'll make more. But typically when you're starting with a staghorn fern mount, you're starting with a younger plant. So there should only really be one. But it's a big round frond that will grow kind of around the base versus the iconic long staghorn fern shaped fronds, which are the fertile fronds that produce spores.
And the long ones are the ones that kind of look like leaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like what you would typically see it and you would say like, oh, that's a leaf. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes, and it's got tons of those, and that's what kind of makes up the whole look of the entire plant, whereas the shield fronds aren't as numerous.
Yeah.
That's just a little important to note for later. So now that we know about the fern, the supplies that I used
are materials and methods. If you were writing it scientifically, you would say materials and methods.
Oh, wow. That's how you know I'm not a scientist. I wrote supplies.
No, that's fine. I'm
Materials and methods.
brainwashed in that way, so.
All you scientists out there that need it in the correct format
Me.
to process.
Anyways, I'm sorry. Continue.
So the materials that you want to gather, you obviously are going to need to figure out what you want to mount your plant on. So what type of wood? I'm sure if you really want to get wild and do edgy research, you could look up what else besides wood, but I would definitely suggest for your first time just using wood. I think you can really use anything you want, but it's important to choose something that's rot resistant if you're going for a long-term situation, which I am sure we all are. Cedar is often recommended because it is so resistant to rot. But honestly, I used just pieces of a cut down tree from Dad's house. So they're definitely not rot resistant. So we'll kind of see how it goes. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go. I also did make 3 different mounts. This all started back last year for Father's Day. I bought Dad a Staghorn Fern, and I wanted to mount it on a piece of wood to give to him for Father's Day from his land, right? That was like my whole idea of what started this. Well, Dad, when you're listening to this, yes, I'm calling you out. He took forever to get me the wood. So I've had this one Staghorn Fern growing in a small pot for literally, 6 months now? I don't know how many months, a bunch of months later. And then I ended up buying another one because I want one too. And then Tate also bought one. So I was like, hey, give it to me and I'll mount it for you. So I had 3 different, I believe they were all 4-inch pots. So all around the same size Staghorn ferns. And one of the things that I think I realized that I loved about this project as I was doing it is it's really fun to look at the shape of the Staghorn fern. I mean, obviously they have the iconic leaf shape, but they grow obviously all different. And so deciding how to hang it was really fun per different fern. I feel like had I only done one, I wouldn't have really realized that, but that was just a really fun thing about it. Anyways, back to your materials, deciding the piece of wood you're going to use. The next thing is the hanging hardware, the most boring part, if you ask me. This is the part I always ask Kyle to help me with because I don't really want to look into it. But how are you going to hang the mount on your wall? So for 2 of the 3 mounts that I made, I just used those sawtooth hangers, which are the little that you see on the back of a picture frame.
Little zigzags.
Yes, the little zigzag. Thank you. Isn't very specific. So yes, zigzag.
Hey, I got it. I don't know.
And for the other one, I originally planned on tying some macrame into a little loop. And I was going to hang it with that, but I ended up not loving the look. So I ended up going with drilling 2 screws in and then wrapping wire around the screws to make kind of a loop situation because I wanted some where you couldn't see the hanging hardware and at least one where you could. So you could hang it on like a cute visible hook of some sort. Next thing you want is your sphagnum moss. Some people do this differently. There's probably other things besides soil and sphagnum moss out there that people use. But I use sphagnum moss as kind of the base to put underneath the root ball of the plant. And it's just a way to support the plant as it grows. And I don't know, Tate, do you know if do the roots go into the wood?
Yeah, I think they just kind of cling onto it. I don't think they go into the tree. Mm-hmm. They just get a really tight grip on the outside.
Gotcha.
Because they don't harm the tree that they're on. Right. I feel like if they went into the tree, that would be kind of harmful. I think they just cling on the outside really well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is what will help it kind of cling, and also this is what will help you make sure you're able to get the full root ball wet when you water it so that you're not having watering issues. The next thing is the material that you're going to use to attach the fern. So actually getting that big old plant mounted on there. There's tons of different things you can use for this. I used a couple different things. For one of them, for yours, Tate, that I made, I used just a clear acrylic cord. So kind of like fishing wire. It's not actually fishing line, but whatever. Same kind of thing. So clear string that you can't see. Nails, preserved sheet moss, which is really more decorative than actually functional, but it was part of how I hung it, so I put it in there. And then I also used this, I found in the kind of ribbon section, I'm pretty sure it was even at Walmart, but there was it kind of looks like they're big squares, so it's like a big open net, and it's kind of twine material, but the edges, like other ribbon, are wrapped in wire. So it's easier to form and shape. So it seemed a little more easy to maneuver. And honestly, the most helpful thing to me was a staple gun. The staple gun was really helpful. So staples for your staple gun. Obviously, you're going to need a staghorn fern or whatever plant you want to mount. There's tons of other ones, like Tate mentioned, orchids and Hoyas and all other kinds of plants that you can mount. So look it up if you're into that sort of thing. Other tools I used that we just had, sanding paper. I just hand sanded really lightly. I didn't go that intense because, again, I was using a raw piece of wood from my dad's house cut from a tree. So I wanted a more unfinished look, so I didn't go crazy with sanding. Staple gun, like I mentioned, you're going to need hammer and nails, screwdriver and screws, depending on what your mounting situation in the back is going to look like. Something you want to make sure when you're looking for those items, you want to make sure that your nails and screws aren't going to stick clear through the other side of your wood. So that's something that I didn't plan ahead for, of course, and had to dig around to find the right length of screws and nails. And then the last little thing that I used was clear glue. It's really just like a tacky glue type of thing. And honestly, I don't know how helpful this was, but it made me feel better about the security of things. So that's what I used.
All right, materials done.
Check. Okay, what's the next step of the scientific process?
Now we're going to talk about your methods.
Methods. All right, on to methods,
your methods,
which I wrote in my notes as steps. Okay, so step 1, and this is something, I do this anytime I do any sort of project or even honestly recipes sometimes. You know when you forget to think ahead and there's always that one extra thing, like you needed to thaw the whatever out of the freezer or you needed to soak the whatever in the marinade.
Yes.
Okay.
Constantly.
So this is kind of like that. I was excited to get started and then I realized I was going to need some more time to prep the wood and give it time to kind of dry. So the first thing you need to do is prep your wood. I would do this the day before or maybe even a couple of days before you actually plan on doing the rest of the steps, because first thing you're going to need to do is clean the wood. Obviously, since I was using wood from nature, it needed some cleaning, and honestly, I just turned my water hose on the jet function and sprayed the crap out of it up close to try to knock all of the excess whatever off. I didn't do any sort of sterilization steps that I'm sure could have been helpful because I just didn't. So again, do your research. Hopefully there's nothing hiding in the wood that's going to eat the fern. Next thing you're going to want to do is sand it. Again, I was going for more of a natural, rugged look, so I didn't do a ton of sanding, but I did just do a little bit to try to help make sure the wood was going to be able to accept the polyurethane, which was what I used to seal it, which I'll get to in a second. And then again, if you think you're going to have maybe kids helping you with taking the mount on and off the wall to water it and all that stuff, you may want to sand a little bit so that you can avoid splinters, or even yourself, not just kids, even for yourself. So that's kind of dependent on the wood. And again, I just used a piece of sandpaper. I don't even know the grit. I'm sorry. And I just did a quick hand sand. And honestly, let me say this also, Kyle did most of the hand sanding because I know he's going to listen to this and be like, you sanded. He really did,
hear it already.
Right? He really did do the sanding because once he finished sanding, he handed it to me and then I started spraying it with the polyurethane, which is the seal it. So the last piece of prepping your wood is sealing it. I used water-based polyurethane. It's just to help the risk of rot. It protects the wood so that it's not going to rot. I did look it up and somewhere it said using the water-based will be fine for plants. So hopefully that's accurate. And I only sprayed one coat because it was late-ish in the evening on a Saturday, and I didn't circle back to do more coats. And I really wanted to get going on the project the next day. So I really only did one coat and let it dry overnight. If you want to be super sure that you're not going to have rotting issues, then I would suggest following the instructions on whatever sealant you're using to tell you what to do best. Once your wood is prepped, then it gets real. Then it's on, then it gets fun, and you get to be a little more creative. So the very first thing, actually this part's not as fun. The very first thing you're going to do, though, is attach your hanging method. So however you are going to attach your mount to the wall, you want to flip your piece of wood over, and get that taken care of. This was a really quick process when I used the sawtooth hanger things, whatever they're called. So it was a lot easier when I used those because obviously it's like a little package deal and you nail it in and it's not that hard. For yours, Tate, when I did I had a couple, I went through a couple different ideas that I wanted to do, had to get a little more creative with that one. But honestly, it shouldn't take long, especially if you plan on using a really basic way to hang it. For yours, I just took 2 screws instead of nails so that they were a little more strong. Took 2 screws, screwed them in kind of on either side of the mount towards the top. And then I just took the metal wire and wrapped it around one and kind of twist tied it so it would be attached to one. And then I went up and looped it at the top and then attached it around the other. So pretty basic. I'm sure there's a lot fancier and more stable, secure ways you could do it. That's just what I did. Then we get to the fun part. So then you flip it over and now it's time. So the first thing you want to do is unpot your Staghorn Fern. It's probably in soil. You don't need that much soil. So what I did was I took it out. They hadn't been watered in a minute, so I needed to rehydrate the soil. So that took a little bit of time. And then what you're going to do is take your fern and kind of use your fingers to spread out from the very base of where the bottom of the pot was. So you want to kind of flatten out the root ball. So rather than it being a true root ball that's stuck down in a pot, you're going to flatten it out a little bit. You're also going to remove any excess soil or any super long roots that aren't going to fit within your mounting frame that you're going for. Once you get that done, so once you've kind of gotten all the excess off, you're obviously going to place your fern down to start deciding where exactly on the mount you want to place it. This is important. You are going to want to place, as far as the rotation, so which side is up, you want to place the sterile frond or the shield frond, which is the one we talked about there's not that many of them. If more than one, there's not many. So you want that to be placed at the very top. So that will be closest to the hanging mount or the top. That would be like,
yeah.
Because of essentially what happens is it grows out and over the base of your plant. So eventually you won't even really see how it's hung because that will grow out and over and kind of cover the base of the plant. So you want to make sure you hang it with that side up because that's how they naturally grow.
So just point the shield up.
Right.
Towards the ceiling.
Yes. You want it to be closest to the ceiling when you're hanging it on the wall.
Gotcha.
Another element you want to consider when deciding the placement of your fern that I didn't really realize until after everything was done was you want to think of the angle that you want the fern to be hanging at as far as how you're attaching it to the wood. So for yours, Tate, when I did, and part of the reason yours ended up this way is because I was doing this fishing line method, which I'll talk a little bit more about here soon, but essentially, if you have it hanging straight out, so say you don't give it any lift towards the top and you have it hanging straight out, then I think over time, the fronds are going to get bigger and heavier and it's going to kind of sag a little bit and won't look as centered on your mount versus when you angle it up just a little bit. It'll give more up and out. It'll give a more up and out look as it grows and kind of support the plant a little better. I think for yours, I went a little too straight on. And then for mine, I did almost too straight up and down. Like I really didn't give it much out at all. Yeah. Dad's is the one I did last. And it's the one that turned out best because obviously I learned this as I went.
Yes.
So you want to just take gravity into account and just think about how you're going to angle it. And so as you're attaching, you want to make sure that you put extra moss where you want it to be lifted a little bit to be able to manipulate that angle. Once you've decided exactly where you want it, you've figured out the angle, you know that the shield frond is at the top and you have it centered or not centered if that's what you're into. I basically just used 4 nails to kind of outline where I had the plant. So I just went straight on the sides, like right in the middle of the whole fern mount and plant, straight on the 2 sides. On the right side and the left side, I put 2 nails in. And I left about, I would say, maybe half an inch. You could probably do a little more, but I left about half an inch of the nail sticking out. So you don't want to nail it all the way in flat, or there's literally no point of having it there. So we'll talk about how we're going to use them here in a second, but I put 2 on the direct side, so the furthest out points from the center, and then I put 2 more down below those and a little more towards the center. So I sort of made like a U shape.
Yeah, like a semicircle.
A semicircle, yes, exactly. Yeah, so I kind of measured where I wanted those. You could mark them, you could draw a line or draw some dots with a pencil if you wanted to. I just kind of went for it. So I just hammered in those nails to kind of keep me in my parameters of where I want the plant to be. You're also going to use these to actually hang the plant, which we'll talk about soon. Before you get to hanging, though, you want to remove the plant from where you had it, and you want to put some sphagnum moss underneath it. Some people keep soil. Some people use soil for this. I'm sure there are all kinds of mixtures and other ideas out there as far as what's best for what goes underneath that root ball. Mine, I didn't remove all the soil, so I didn't really want to add more. I just put some soaked sphagnum moss, which I've also learned this the hard way. You want to soak it. So you want to put the dehydrated sphagnum moss in water and let it soak till it's completely, fully soaking wet. And then you want to drain it out. So you want to wring it out like a wash rag or whatever before you put it on the mount. So you're going to just put a little bed. I didn't really do anything that specific or super thick. I just put kind of a thin layer of that sphagnum moss down, and then I placed my staghorn fern back where I wanted it on top of that sphagnum moss.
So at this point, is the board that you're hanging it on, is it flat on the table?
Yes, the whole time.
And so you just kind of put the sphagnum moss while it's flat, just kind of outlining.
Within my little U shape is where I put the sphagnum moss, and a little above it, but right in there. And yes, the whole time I'm working on this, I left it flat. And some say you should leave it flat for a couple weeks to let it kind of acclimate coming out of a pot setting or a pot in soil setting, and before you stick it up on a wall totally sideways. So I've left them kind of flat. Actually, that's a lie. I have them leaning up against a wall right now, so I haven't left them flat, so I didn't follow the rules. But some people say that that's the best way to make sure it's fully acclimated before you hang it, and I think that probably plays in more the bigger you get, so the more weight you have, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's time for the fun part. So now you have everything kind of planned the way you want it. There are lots of ways that you can actually attach the fern, but I use 2 main methods. One, I use the fishing line, and then the second one, like I talked about, I used that kind of burlappy twine stuff. Before you start tying strings and anything like that, you are going to want to make sure you don't really see any soil or roots. So for some of the mounts I did, I used more of the sphagnum moss, and for some of them I used some preserved sheet moss, which is purely decorative. So between those two, and for some of them I use kind of a combination. Again, you want to make sure the entire root ball is going to be able to get some moisture. So I kind of sprinkled some sphagnum moss all around the outside. And then the ones that I went real heavy with the sheet moss, I just kind of peeled off a piece and put it around the whole root ball. And then some I did more of a piecing together look with the sphagnum moss, because the sheet moss I had was real green and the sphagnum moss I had was kind of yellowy. So
sounds like this could be a part where you could kind of tweak it to how you want it to look.
Oh, 100%. So for yours, when I used the fishing line, essentially what I did was cover the root ball, like I just said. So for yours, I used...
Wait, question.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, so you put the moss on the thing.
Yep.
So now, do you put the fern in and then tie it, or do you set up the support, like fishing line or the burlap first?
Great question. All of the tying and string and burlap all goes on top. So the layers, if I'm going to talk about this like a Krabby Patty, okay, the layers are going to be the wood.
Yep.
You're going to have a little bit of sphagnum. You're going to have your nails already in. Then you put the fern. Angle it how you want, so you may need to add a little sphagnum at the base to tilt it up a little bit. Then you want to cover the roots, because that's what you're going to see for a while. So until that shield frond grows over, you're obviously going to see the base piece. So you want to add your sphagnum, obviously for the health of the plant, to make sure it can get water and drink the water, and the sheet moss to make it look the way you want it to.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, I got lost.
No, it's all good. So then from there, we have our root ball all covered the way we want it. Everything's kind of angled where we want it. At this point, I'm still kind of having to hold things in place with one of my hands as I'm adding with the other, if that helps paint the picture.
Yes, it does.
Great.
I like the Krabby Patty analogy. That really helped.
I knew you would appreciate it.
It's like an onion. It has layers.
Ooh, get the Shrek reference in. Yes.
Yes.
Live for it. I'm sure you can tell exactly what our childhood was like when we grew up between like those references right there. Okay, so when it comes to actually attaching, this is where I got a little bit more winging it, you could say. I was kind of winging it. I watched tons of videos and read tons of articles for months when preparing for this, really. So I don't have a really good way of nailing down exactly where I got each little idea. And it's just kind of how I roll with, again, like recipes too. I do a lot of research and then I kind of just let all those things bounce around in my head and wing it and hope it works out. So this is where the winging it part really comes into play. I took the fishing line and essentially I tied a bunch of double knots around one of the upper two nails that I put in on the side of the plant. So I attached the string to one of those, tied it around and around and around and around. Then I used my little clear glue and glued it down. Again, don't know how helpful that truly was, but it made me feel like it was going to keep the knots in place a little better.
I bet it helped. We used to do that when we this is going to be a sidebar, but when I helped on, some bird research projects, and we'd give them little GPS backpacks on their back.
Birdie
you
backpacks.
Yeah, that's what they call them, little backpacks. They're really cute.
Oh.
And they would tie the knot. It'd usually be like elastic string so they could still move their wings fine. And you tie the knot and then you'd put a little bit of the glue on that knot to keep it there. So I bet it would help. I mean,
it couldn't hurt. Exactly. I was like, we'll just add it. It makes me feel better. So.
Why not?
Birdie backpacks. That's the cutest thing I've ever heard.
Yes. And that's so cute. And they literally look like backpacks. That's how you put them on, like a little backpack.
That is so cute.
It's very cute. They don't think it's very cute.
Yeah, I'm sure they don't really appreciate the style choice.
Once they're gone and they're out of your, once they're back in the wild, they're fine. But
that's so
at the
funny.
time, they're like, excuse me, can you not?
Okay, so once I've attached the fishing line to the first nail and kind of glued it down, then essentially what you do is you're going to ping pong between all the different nails that you have and just wrap the cord around the nail and then over to the next one, wrap it around. You want to try to cross the plant every time. So you want to go kind of across and then back the other direction. Obviously, if you go in a circle, you're just drawing a circle around the outside and not restraining the plant in, if that makes sense.
You're not giving it like any support if you don't cross
you gotta nail that sucker down, so to speak. So you want to also, while you're thinking about going across, wrap around, then back the other way, wrap around, up, wrap around, down, wrap around. Like you're trying to kind of go all different directions and going opposite directions so that you're creating that almost net type of situation to hold the plant in. You also want to go between some of those fronds or leaves, what you would probably think of as the leaves. You would want to go between a lot of those to, again, make sure you're really securing that plant in. So you don't want to just go around the outside. Sense. You want to kind of cut through the plant a little bit, carefully, obviously, but that'll help with your security.
Good idea. I didn't think about doing it like through the leaves like that.
Mm-hmm. As I was doing this too, I was adding pieces of moss where I felt like it would give it more thickness and it kind of evened out the root ball mass area. So as I was doing that, I was sticking pieces of both the sheet moss really and the sphagnum moss to, again, kind of layer up the area. So that's kind of, you just go across and across and across. And this is where, as I was doing it, so you could do more nails, more than 4, and then you would obviously have more wraparound points. I've definitely seen people do like 8 nails all the way around, almost in a true circle. What I ended up doing was busting out my trusty staple gun, and any of the moments that I felt like I needed a little more support, I would staple the fishing line in, and then I would continue to wrap and tie.
Yeah, so if you don't have a staple gun, you could probably just add a couple more screws. Mm-hmm. In there for the extra support.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
That's the way I would think would be best. Yeah. To kind of tie this one off, the last one I went was down towards the base of the plant, and then I took one more kind of up the center of the plant, so I was back at the top. Then I used a staple, stapled it in, and then started the whole, I tied around the nearest nail and tied a trillion knots. I don't know what kind of knots, just knots over and over and over to make it super, super secure. And then again, added more glue. And then that was that. That's pretty much how you do that one. The others, I was kind of doing different variations of the moss, really, between Dad's and mine, but it's basically the same thing. Again, all the steps up until you have your plant and you have your moss all around the root ball are all the same. So I still have everything else I've done up to that point was the same. Instead of starting now to tie fishing wire around, what I did was take the burlap ribbon string net stuff that I had, and I essentially tried to make like a pocket. So I went kind of from the top corner angle and just draped it across the root ball around the bottom, so kind of underneath where all of the fronds / what look like leaves are, and then literally staple gunned it in. So kind of all around, just staple gunned it in. Obviously, I don't love the look of the staples that show, but really from far away you can't tell. You can only tell when you're looking up close at it. So I stapled that in, so it was like almost like a piece of fabric or true burlap across, and it cupped the whole thing like a pocket, and I stapled it down onto the wood. Because what I used had that wiring too, I then took some of those edges. So I trimmed off any excess, and then I took the edges that were wire and kind of wrapped it around some more of the nails just to kind of secure it as best I could. And I do want to say with one of them, I added some fishing line to try to add that extra support, and one of them I didn't. So I don't remember which one was which, so we'll just have to see what holds up best. But then after I stapled that down, I then again, to try to fill out the look a little bit more, stuffed some more sphagnum moss in all the kind of gaps to make it look a little more finished, I guess you could say. And that's that for that one. That one was super easy. That's why I recommend the staple gun. But I must admit, I really like the look of the floating, you could say, or where you can't tell how it's attached. I like the look of those better. So the last thing you want to do before you're pretty much done is, especially if you might be able to do this. I mean, I did this after I tied off the top of the fishing line one. And I obviously did this after I stapled the twine burlap stuff in. I took another little pinch of the sphagnum moss, and you kind of stick it in the top and tuck it underneath. Not really underneath, but try to tuck it in as close to the back where the root ball is as possible, because that's where you're going to water. And you want to make sure water is going to soak from that sphagnum moss down into the sphagnum moss that you placed behind the plant and into the root ball.
Smart.
So you want to just add a little extra there so that you have a clear place where you can start the watering process. And then the last thing I did was water. So I did this in my garage. So I just took the hose and gently, not with the jet setting, gently sprayed it down, made sure the root ball was completely soaked, which is what you're going to want to do every time you water, and let them sit out in the sun to dry a little bit.
So there you have it. That doesn't sound too bad.
It's really not hard.
It seems like it's just about getting the support to hold it up.
Yep, which...
and getting it real secure on that thing, on the whatever board you have it on.
Yes. And again, for these, they were all 4-inch plants, so they were all pretty small. So they all seem pretty secure right now. I am very curious to see which of these hold up the best and how these grow. Again, I did lots of research just over time and let it soak into the back of my brain. So I feel like there could be some missteps, like, again, sterilizing the wood or something that I hope don't come back to bite us in the rear. But I'm really curious to watch them all grow, because they all turned out very different looking.
Yeah, we'll need to take like pictures of them every month or every so often to track how they grow.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
That'd be kind of cool to see.
As I was doing this, obviously, then I was having all kinds of different ideas of different ways that you could do this. Plus, I've seen there are tons of great ideas out there. People have done all kinds of really cool stuff. I just wanted to talk about a couple of variations that I think, are worth at least kind of talking through. As far as hanging the mount on your wall, again, my original plan for yours was to do a macrame knot loop thing. Mm-hmm. For me, it looked a little too grandma cabin in the woods. It looked a little... something about it with the natural tree look was just a little...
And the macrame.
Yeah, it was just a little much for me. but I think macrame could look good with a different piece of wood. I also think, or I should say, I think the next thing I want to try, next time I try to make one of these to hang, is to use a eye hook, which is like a normal hook with the screw on the end, but it closes all the way. So it's like a loop.
Oh.
So I think, and there's obviously different ways you could use those, but I think I want to get some black ones, and that's what I'm going to try next time as far as hanging it. But obviously, you can use all kinds of different attachments or hardware pieces or whatever to hang your mount, and it's definitely part of the look. Like I mentioned for yours, Tate, I wanted to be able to see what it's hanging on because I think it would be cute on like a cool hook, and then that would be a little more supportive in the wall versus the just screws with the daga on it.
What did you say? The seesaw?
Sawtooth.
Seesaw?
You weren't far.
I don't know why my brain was like seesaw.
You weren't far from
it. The sawtooth, yeah.
The sawtooth. So you could obviously do lots of different things, like I've said 3 times now, but I just think it's worth noting what can be kind of helpful, especially when you're thinking of what you want out of this piece, when you know where it's going in your house, you know, or your apartment or wherever you live, you know where it's going, you know what it's going to be around. I just think it's worth thinking about how you're going to hang it. Do you want it to be visible or do you want it to be invisible? Do you want it to be just like it by itself, speaking for itself? Because the more embellishments you add, again, can create so many different looks. So I think that was just something important to note. I was excited to get fancy with how it was hung, and then I decided against it because I didn't like it with the wood we had. But I'm excited to explore more different ways that you can hang the mount on the wall. The next thing that obviously is very easy to change, kind of like you already mentioned, Tate, is how you attach the fern to the piece of wood. My favorite look are the ones with the fishing wire and all the natural moss because I think it looks really sleek and natural and you can't even tell how it's hanging on there, which I think draws in interest, especially not plant people who are like, oh my gosh, is that a plant on your wall? I think that's kind of fun. And again, it's just kind of I like the cleaner look a little bit better, at least right now in my life. I'm sure that will change.
Almost looks like it's hanging there by itself.
Looks really cool.
Yeah.
The other thing that I used for mine and Dad's was it has a twine look to it. So it's got a little more of a clunky, I don't want to say farmhousey, but you know, it's got
rustic?
more of, maybe like a rustic vibe to it. Again, with the natural wood, I think it looks really good. It looks cohesive together. But again, it adds more interest that is different than the plain natural and maybe sleek or more simple look. So there are tons of ways that you could do that. I'm even curious, maybe you could find a way to make that piece out of macrame, and then you could have the macrame hanging part so then it can kind of tie in a little better. You could use just true straight up burlap, which can be different colors. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can use. And then obviously you could change up the base or the wood that you're using. You can also use, I've seen, it's almost like a wooden crate style small box that you can plant it in with all that moss, similarly to how you do on the wood, and you can hang it like a pot to where the base of the plant is parallel to the ground. Those look cool, and then you can also hang that same wooden box on the wall. And it's just, again, a totally different look.
Yeah.
I've also seen just different hanging baskets that are made out of wire, just stuffed with the sphagnum moss that you could use. Again, that would be more of the upright orientation, but yeah, like you said, the possibilities are endless. So when it comes to caring for your brand new beautiful fern that you have just mounted, you definitely want to let this dry out between waterings. Obviously, this is something new to me. I am still learning how long it's going to take for these to dry out, but just like with any plants, you want to check it before you water it, and these do like to dry out, so you want to really let them dry out before you water it. My plan is to continue to check it every day. Once I feel like it's actually dry, I'm going to wait till the next day to water it to just make sure that deep down in there everything really had the chance to dry out. I think I'm going to start with the plan in my brain of every 2 weeks watering, especially because it's winter. When it's summer, you will probably need to up it to once a week, especially depending on if you have it outside versus inside. Obviously, how often you water is very much dependent on a million variables. But again, you want to let it dry out. And sometimes it's just helpful to hear someone else's plan. So my plan right now is to water every other week. So every 2 weeks, I'll give it a good soaking water. And once we get into true growing season in the spring and summer, then I'll probably increase that.
Bump it up.
Bump it up. As far as how you're going to water it, you are going to take it off the wall, because obviously if you water it on the wall is going to get wet because it's wood and it'll soak through. So you want to take it off the wall. You are going to completely soak it. My plan, haven't done it yet, but my plan is to stick it in the bathtub and then just get my big watering can that I have and fully soak it. So starting from the top, I'll probably hold it upright like it's hanging on the wall and start from the top and pour down all over it. And then from there, once I see water kind of seeping out the bottom, I'll tilt it back and then water it while it's laying flat. Again, you just want to make sure, since you are letting it really dry out between waterings, you want to make sure when you do water, it is a full soak. Then you'll let it drip dry. So leave it out. I'll probably leave it out for a full day because, again, I don't want any moisture to be in there to where it's going to leak onto my wall. But you're going to let it drip dry. And yeah, that's pretty much how you water it. It's kind of straightforward. But something to take into account is misting. Because of the way we let them dry out, they do appreciate misting, and they do take in water through their fronds. Unlike some plants where misting is really just to help with the humidity, these will actually absorb water through their fronds, aka their leaves, kind of like their leaves. So misting is going to keep that fern much, much happier between your waterings than if you chose not to mist. Pretty much every care guide that I have read or heard or looked up or anything like that has talked about misting. So I do think it's something that is going to be pretty detrimental if you opt out. I know misting is one of those things that can get a little controversial. Some people think it's good, people think it's bad, but I think for this plant, since it does absorb the water through the fronds, it's good for it. As with any misting, you want to make sure that you have some decent air circulation around that plant so that your fern isn't just sitting wet, because that's how the fungal and moldy bacteria, I don't know exactly what, but that's where you can run into problems with disease. You want to make sure there's good airflow so that the water your plant doesn't absorb is able to evaporate in a decent amount of time. I think I'm going to start with misting it just twice a week. Again, we're still in winter, so I don't want to go too overboard. You can always scale up, right? We say it all the time. It's always easy to come back from underwatering than overwatering. So I'm going to try to start pretty light and then up the ante from there. As far as where to place your brand new beautiful mount, you are going to, obviously this plant grows on trees, so it's underneath the trees. So it's not used to or I can't even try. I tried. I was going to try to use the word adapted, but whatever. It's used to getting kind of dappled light. So you want to go for indirect light. It does not want
You were right.
direct light.
It's not adapted to full sun.
It's not adapted to full sun. That's what I was saying. You're right.
Yeah, it's not adapted like an aloe vera or like a cactus. It's adapted to full sun. Doesn't seem like these guys are adapted for more shady conditions.
That's right. So you want to choose a spot. Thank you. You want to use a spot in your home that gets lots of light. This is not a low light plant. I don't think it's going to go well for you if you stick it in a low light spot. You want to put it somewhere really bright that doesn't get direct sun. So I know that seems kind of ambiguous, but I think for mine, I plan on putting it in my bedroom, which has 4 really big windows. So it gets really bright in there, but it's morning light. And we have a 2-story house behind us. So it doesn't get a lot of direct light in there for very long, only in the morning. And then where I put it on the wall will be out of that direct light, but still in a very bright room that stays pretty bright all day. So I don't know if that helps you. Hopefully it does. I feel like if it's not direct light or low light, anything in between for a long time made me feel very confused. So of the scale, this is on the higher side of light. You just don't want to burn the leaves. As far as fertilizing goes, since I put mine on a bed of moss that doesn't really have any nutrients, I'm definitely going to be conscious of that and fertilize them. The younger the fern is, the more fertilizer it needs. I think when you get to the point of a gigantic, heavy, intense staghorn fern, they don't need as much fertilizer. I think I read, again, if you guys listened, if you didn't listen to our New Year, New Plant Goals New Year's episode, I suggest you go listen to it. But one of my goals for this year is to really hone in on my fertilizing game. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to do some more research into how to fertilize this. If you have questions, you know where to find us. I'd be happy to answer, even though I'm sure you could find that answer from a ton of other people online. But definitely fertilizing is something that I need to keep in mind and get going on, since there was some soil still on the roots, but since I didn't plant it on any nutrient-based whatever, it's going to need some nutrients. I also read about when I was trying to look at what kind of fertilizer, and then realized I don't know that much about fertilizer, so I wasn't even going to mention it. I did notice a lot of people talking about sticking some banana peel under the shield fronds, like little chunks of it, and then eventually it'll break it down. But that sounds like fruit flies and fungus gnats to me, so maybe a little further down the line I'll try that, but I don't think I'm going to go for that at this time. I also am curious if, since it takes in water through its fronds, if you could use, kind of like orchids, if you could use the type of fertilizer that you spray on the fronds rather than like water diluted.
I think so. I think that's how in their natural environment, that's how they get their nutrients, is through the air.
So that's something to note too. That's definitely an option and probably something I will try. Okay, a couple of caveats before we wrap up how much I love this. Of course, over time, things will rot and things will break down. So depending on how well you treated your wood or what kind of wood you used, eventually over time that may start to break down. And then same with any twine you use. The nice thing about using fishing line is that's not going to break down because it's synthetic, but anything that's not synthetic is going to break down over time as your plant grows and there's moisture, lots of water and then it dries out, lots of water dries out, will wear down any materials. And that kind of ties into, this will outgrow its mount just like a potted plant would outgrow the pot they're in. So eventually you're going to have to take this off the mount. Hopefully yours survives. I feel like I'm doing all this thinking about how I'm going to up pot these when, let's see if they even survive. So hopefully you have great luck and they survive so that you have the opportunity to pot up, quote unquote, or mount up, maybe is what you would say. So just know that over time, especially as that shield frond starts to wrap not only around the base of the plant, but the closer that gets to the edges of the piece of wood, that's kind of your cue to know, like, okay, this thing is happy and I need to give it a bigger home. You could, if you wanted to, let's say yours is awesome and thriving and popping out tons and tons and tons of growth. These are supposedly pretty easy to divide, so you could either up mount or you could divide and make a bunch of different small mounts. So just like a normal plant, those are your options. And you just want to obviously take into consideration your walls. I think the big giant ones can get super, super heavy. And so I'm sure there's a limit on what you can hang on your walls depending on what hardware you use. So just throwing that out there to take that into consideration. I'm also curious, this is kind of another thing, I know they can grow outside, so that's something I'm looking forward to. Maybe the next one I do, I'll try to keep outside this summer.
Ooh,
and see the differences of keeping it inside versus outside, and which seems to be more successful. Again, no direct light outside. It grows under a tree, so you want to attach it near, like right underneath a tree or under a shaded patio or something like that.
Yeah, I saw online that sometimes you can just attach them to the tree.
That's so cool.
Obviously, you'd have to find a way to support, like have it be supported for a while so it can like attach itself. But I think eventually it can, it'll just grow on a tree.
Yep. So that's pretty much all I have. Again, I will say I really enjoyed doing this. It took a while to get around to doing it, to be honest, between gathering the materials and just blocking out the time. Life just gets busy. What's new? But I sincerely enjoyed it. They turned out a lot nicer looking than I was kind of anticipating, since I didn't really go into it with a super concrete plan. And I don't know. I felt it very satisfying and gratifying. I was really glad that I had finally gotten around to doing it, and I really love them. I look at them because I haven't
they look really
I haven't
good.
given them to you or Dad yet, so I have all three, and I really enjoy looking at them, and I'm super excited to get mine in its place on the wall. And I'm excited to see where y'all put yours.
I'm so excited.
And again, like you said, we should compare over time how they hold up, because I'm not sure how they're going to hold up.
I love how they look. I really like the mount that we have. That it was just a tree that Dad cut down. And I'm glad we were able to find some use for the wood other than just burning it. And it just looks really cool. Like, I'm so excited to put it up. I can't wait.
Yes, me too.
Thanks, by the way.
Of course. It was good. I liked having, again, it was really nice to have multiple because A, that takes some of the pressure off. Like, you don't feel like I have one shot. I don't know. Sometimes I can get really worried. Mom is always really good at this. She's like, just go for it. She dives right in. Whereas I'm really worried I'm going to mess something up all the time. So it was nice in that way to have multiple. And also it enabled me to try the different mounting techniques, sort of. Again, there's tons more out there, but I don't know. It gave me some creative freedom. So that was really fun. So thank you for allowing me to hang yours.
Yeah, thanks for doing it. It's probably going to be a lot more happy hanging up on this mount than it would be in the pot that I had it sitting in. So I'm really excited. I'm happy for the plant. And by the way, in science, we would say you want replicates. And in this case, we have triplicates since you have 3.
Oh my God. Replicates and triplicates. Funny.
Oh, yeah. You know, there's a word for everything in biology or in science.
I feel that. There's an acronym for everything in teaching, so I feel that.
Yep. Wow.
Any other questions, thoughts, aside from the fact that you're just so excited?
You know, when you say it all out, it seems intimidating, but when you actually realize and visualize what you're doing, it doesn't actually seem that hard. It seems like the hardest part would just be making sure it's supported enough on the mount. But besides that, it seems totally doable and fun.
Yes, it was so fun. And to me, the hardest part was honestly gathering the materials and the tools. That's kind of like everything, right? It just takes, you got to get going on it. And once you get going, you get going.
And I feel like too, for us, there's a kind of a learning curve on the tools side of things more than on the plant side of things.
Exactly.
We're good on the plant side of things, but when it comes to figuring out what kind of sealant to use and how to nail this stuff into the mounts and all that, hardware, I'll be what's the word I'm looking for? Hardware stuff seems like, kind of a learning curve for us.
Yes, agreed. I think
so
you're
if you're
right.
out there and you're listening and you know about hardware, you know all this stuff, it may be even easier just to get all the things that you'll need and just make it happen.
And like anything, if it's something you really want to do and it seems overwhelming, just break it down into small pieces and small steps and just do a little bit at a time. Yeah. I am in the next month going to locate the wood that I'm going to use.
Exactly.
And then the next month I'm going to, again, that takes energy and effort and thought too. So don't want to add to your plate. I just want to encourage you. Again, this was a very gratifying project that I'm really happy I did. And like Tate said, it is super doable. So I encourage you to try something new. Worst comes to worst, it might die and life goes on and you get a new plant.
But you tried it and you probably will learn from doing it.
And you'll feel less intimidated next time you need to look for tools or materials or whatever because you've done it before.
And if you do try it, or if you already have a mount of your own, we would love to see it. We would love to see everyone's creativity. We'd love to see what you have up. If you have one, if you try it after this episode, please share that with us because that is so cool. We love to see it.
Even if no one else tells you did a good job, we will.
Yep.
We can be your positive reinforcement because, again, they look really cool. I also think if you have any tips on how to care for them, as we are starting this journey, we would love to hear advice or thoughts on things that work well for you. So again, if you have one, share your tips with us and we'll share them with everybody and try them out. You can share with us via Instagram or Twitter. Our handle is @PlantThatSis. You can find us on YouTube as well. Just search Plant That Sis. You could email us, plantthatsis@gmail.com, or you could visit our website, plantthatsis.com. Thank you so much for listening. I hope we've inspired you or made you at least think a little bit outside the box for something that makes you excited in your own life. And we hope you have a great day.
Day, week, and life.
That's
all
right.
All 3.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.